Hello everybody, my name is Rachel and welcome to a wrap-up of all the things I finished reading over the past 3 weeks or so. It's been a while since I sat down to do a wrap-up, mainly because my reading slowed down and then I was just feeling really bummed out because of things going on. But now I've got 11 things piling up and I need to do something about that. So today I'm going to talk about 9 of them. There are 2 I'm not going to talk about because they will be in an upcoming video, and those are Dying of the Light by George R. R. Martin and The Door into Summer by Robert Heinlein. These are both SF Masterworks titles and I'm doing a project to read as many of these as possible, so I'll be doing a separate video on them. The first thing I want to talk about today is Selected Poems by Federico Garcia Lorca. This particular volume is translated by Merryn Williams. Lorca was a Spanish poet. He was very famous, is still very famous in Spain, and he was killed during, I believe, the Spanish Civil War. And I had heard Lorca's name before, but didn't really know anything about him or his work, his poetry, so I was eager to explore him a little bit. I've been seeking out translated poetry this year, and so this one was on my list. And I enjoyed getting to this. I really enjoyed learning more about Lorca as a person and, you know, the importance and the influence of his works, but I didn't feel like the poetry itself really did anything for me. What I will say though is that his style, the types of poems in this, are really different from anything else I've read in poetry over the last year and a half or so. And that in and of itself was interesting. I also read a bilingual edition, so I was able to read some of the Spanish alongside the English translations, and I like doing that. As I keep saying, my reading comprehension in Spanish is not very good anymore, but sometimes I'm still able to get hints of the flavor of, you know, the original language, the original cadence of the words. And I wondered perhaps if I should seek out more of his work but by a different translator, because I wasn't sure if it was just the type of poetry that I wasn't really jiving with or the translation itself, which is always a possibility. Then I wanted something very different and lighthearted, so I read a romance novel, and that was Heart and Soul by Erin Kinsella. I think this particular one has been going around on BookTube a little bit. I've seen multiple people talk about it and say it's really good. So this is set in South Korea. It's about a woman who is an author. Her book is being turned into a K-drama, and her favorite K-pop idol star, her bias, has been cast as the lead character, and due to some interesting circumstances, she ends up being taken home with him because she's very ill, basically, and then the paparazzi get a hold of the pictures and she ends up having to fake marry him because stuff. So I was interested in this because it is, you know, it's set in South Korea. It is really about K-pop and how that whole fandom works, and I just thought that was going to be really interesting. I can't speak to how accurately a lot of this was written. I'm not myself into K-pop. I don't know anything really about South Korean culture. But there's a lot of explanation in the story itself as to why certain things are happening and why things are done the way they are in K-pop. But this has got to be the most unbelievable setup for a romance situation. I've never read a novel with fake dating before, so maybe it's that particular trope that I don't really believe, but there was something so implausible about most of the major developments in the story to get these characters together, beginning with the why in the world would this guy take a woman home with him when she's a complete stranger? He should just call somebody else and have them take care of it. He could have avoided so many problems with that one little step. So for most of this book, I just had a hard time suspending my disbelief that any of this would have really happened. It was very contrived in my opinion. Despite that, it was a lot of fun and it was just really different from any other romance novel I had read, so it was a good time. The one thing about this that really bugged me, that I don't know if it's me or not, but everybody in this story touches each other all the time. I just have questions about that particular aspect. In many scenes, I felt like it was being played as a cute, affectionate thing, but also I wanted to scream at some people, it's inappropriate to be doing that particular thing in this situation. Like, just grow up, be a little bit mature, keep your hands and the rest of your body to yourself. But anyway, I believe there are going to be future books that explore the romances for other people in the K-pop group in the story, and I will probably read them when I'm in the right mood. And then we come to a boatload of science fiction. The first one is Blue Remembered Earth by Alastair Reynolds. This is the first in a trilogy that I've wanted to try for a while. I listened to this on audiobook. I'm a bit hesitant to read some meaty science fiction tomes on audio because, you know, if I get distracted, I'll miss important things. But I found that a lot of Reynolds stories work really well on audio for me, and this one was not an exception to that. I enjoyed it, and I really liked the narrator who did it. I wish I had made a note of his name. Hopefully he narrates the other two books in the trilogy. So I actually find it difficult to summarize this book because of all the things going on. If I just describe what I think is the core plot, I leave out a ton of other things that are also happening and kind of the flavor of the book. But it's basically a near future story about siblings, Jeffrey and Sunday, who go off on a quest to discover clues that their dead grandmother left behind about this secret she'd been keeping for decades that may have major implications for the human race. And they're basically inheriting the secret from her when they find it, and they have to decide what to do with it. And I like that premise. I really like you know, quests for clues and like trying to piece together these things and figuring out that someone's life is not what you were led to believe. That is really interesting. But there were so many other things crammed into this story when Jeffrey and Sunday kind of separate to investigate things in different directions. Both of them just get dragged into escapade after escapade. And when the actual reveal happened, I almost missed it. It didn't feel like a major point. It just felt like another scene, and that is not cool for like the pacing of the story and everything. You want to really have that buildup and that excitement when the revelation finally happens. So I would mainly say this book's problem is its length and its pacing, but everything else is really cool. And while I might gripe a little bit about the side aspects to explore the world building, but there's some really interesting stuff here that Reynolds has imagined about the future technologies and how people will adapt to that, how they'll adapt their bodies and everything. So I found those things interesting, even if I kept thinking, oh, this particular scene could have been cut. What we were seeing was still kind of cool. So when I ended the book, I really wanted to continue with the rest of the series, and I finally tracked down an audiobook of the second one, On the Steel Breeze, so I'll hopefully continue with this pretty soon. And I'm excited because I think the second book goes far, far, far into the future with different characters and stuff, so it could just be, you know, a completely different type of story, really exploring more the consequences of what we find out in the first book. For a long time, I think I was the only person on the face of the planet who hadn't read Shades of Grey by Jasper Fforde. I've read a bunch of his other books, but never got around to this one until I finally listened to it on audiobook, and it was really good. I completely understand now why people, when they get to the ending, go, that was great, we need another book. Oh, it's so sad we're never gonna get another book. I mean, I don't know if Fforde has any plans at this point to continue the series. This is very much the first book in a series. There are no real answers or conclusions, which just makes that great ending even harder to accept, because I don't think there's ever going to be a book after this. So it is about a very strange society, a community where people can only see one color, and the color that you can see determines your social status and kind of your role in society. And there are like some very strange, bizarre, and funny rules and like etiquette that people have to follow in the society. There's this whole system of merits and demerits, and it's very complicated, and a lot of it seems to be about who can marry who, and like a little bit of a breeding program where families are trying to progressively over the generations improve the color that they see. Getting closer to red and purple is the goal. And so there are actually a lot of like marriage arrangement shenanigans in this book, which was hilarious. It almost feels like a parody of Jane Austen style romances and, you know, weighing social statuses and pedigrees and stuff versus where your heart is leading you. And it's a very slow-paced book. Very little really happens. It's just a very slow build-up, and then like the last quarter of the novel gets serious and like some really surprising things happen, and then it ends without any answers. And it's basically about one young man who starts to question, to explore why his society is the way it is, and he meets some surprising people who don't conform, essentially. And yeah, the book ends just as you find out that, you know, things have been happening. It's not all sunshine and roses in this community. I really want another book. It's been like a decade since this novel came out. I don't think there's ever gonna be a sequel. After that, I read a short translated novel by Leena Krohn called Pereat Mundus, and this was weird and kind of surreal. I don't think I completely understood what was going on in it. We're introduced to two characters. Hakan, a man whose consciousness is duplicated, like another version of himself is made, and that version in the machine appears in many different forms, almost like alternate reality versions of Hakan in many of the chapters. Then there is a second character named Dr. Fakelove, who is like an agony aunt. He does a lot of counseling of people's relationships and problems online. So every chapter is basically a vignette, like a little bit of a flash fiction chapter about a different version of Hakan. Some of them get very strange. And then interspersed with that is this continuing story of Dr. Fakelove, who is interacting with at least one of the versions of Hakan. I don't know what a lot of the point of this is. At first I thought it was like exploring the different routes that Hakan's life could have taken if he had been in a different world, a different person, made different decisions, but I don't think that was actually the point. I really don't know. I'm a bit at a loss as how to describe this book. Though it didn't make any sense to me, I found many of the individual chapters to be very striking. Just the ideas, the imagery, the writing just were very sharp and precise, and I could really see this thing happening, but trying to figure out what the whole of this story meant, I have no idea. Then I read two books by Pat Cadigan. Both of these are cyberpunk novels, though they are very different from each other. The first one is Tea from an Empty Cup, which I didn't really enjoy, and then Mindplayers, which is now my favorite book by Pat Cadigan. I'll start with Tea from an Empty Cup because I don't have much analysis of this one to talk about. This is about virtual reality, and I think part of the reason I didn't like it very much is that, as far as I can tell, Cadigan's view of how virtual reality and the internet will be used is really depressing. It basically just devolves into people are terrible, everything is lies, and everybody is doing drugs and involved in crime. There are two storylines that eventually meet. The first one is about a woman named Yuki who is trying to find out what happened to her friend Tom. She ends up approaching a crime boss lady who had employed her friend, and then ends up being employed by the crime boss lady herself. She goes into virtual reality and experiences some very strange things while trying to look for clues to her friend's disappearance, and I did not understand what happened in this particular storyline. There was nothing to ground it. I did not have any sense to who Yuki was, why she would do this. There's very little backstory about her friendship with the man that she is looking for. There was just no good reason for a lot of it. And it became very fractured and hallucinogenic. The other storyline I liked a lot more because it was more straightforward, and that is about a detective, Dore Constantine, who is investigating the death of a young man who died in real life when his avatar was killed in virtual reality, and that should not be possible. But Constantine discovers that there are other similar cases of people dying when their avatars have died in virtual reality, and she's trying to figure out if there's a connection to these. And her storyline does eventually end up with Yuki's, but I did not really understand the ending. I thought there should have been about 20 more pages tacked onto the end to really explore what happened. I really don't know, and I don't think it was a satisfying answer if there was one in there. So yeah. However, the next book I read by Cadigan was Mindplayers, and it was so much better. This is definitely my favorite book by Cadigan now. I'd read Fools a couple of years ago, and that's kind of a sequel to Mindplayers. And Mindplayers is, I think, the introduction of this concept of mind playing and the mind-to-mind mental contact that people now can have. And it has got to be the most lucid and straightforward story I've ever read by Cadigan. It was much more focused and less psychedelic, basically, which is probably why I got along a lot better with it. It follows a woman named Allie who initially has basically a drug experience and gets caught by the mind police because she's gone crazy without a license. They straighten her out and they give her two options. She can undergo her punishment, basically, 30 days imprisonment or whatever, or because she has so much mental potential, she can go train as an actual mind player and have a profession in this. She opts for that one. And the story follows her through her training and then through her first major cases as a pathos finder, which is a type of mind player. And it was so good. I liked that it only followed one character. There's only one point of view. This is the first time I've ever felt attached to one of Cadigan's characters. And I really got a sense for what Allie was like and how much she had changed by the end of the book. She does grow up, she does become more mature, a bit hardened, and understands herself and her relationship to other people better, I think. Whereas I think that Fools was about identity and having yourself stolen or created in, the mind playing technology. I think that Mindplayers is instead about just what essentially it means to have mental contact with people and questioning whether when you're in such intimate contact with somebody, they leave behind something in your mind and what that does to you over time. And of course it has a correlation with just having somebody in your life, even if you're not having mental contact with them. We say that people leave behind a little bit of themselves with the people that they have been in contact with, and it's very much the same thing here. But what does that mean with somebody like Allie, who I think is struggling to identify who she is and what is really inside of her own head? She wants to straighten out what is her versus what is other people, but that's possibly the wrong question to be asking. Other people can become part of you, I guess. I just think that the questions this one explored was really interesting, and the format, the storytelling, was so much easier to understand. So this is one I would definitely recommend. If you've never read anything by Pat Cadigan, I think this is a great starting point. Everything else I've read by her has been a little bit crazier and harder to understand. This could kind of ease you in to the type of cyberpunk that she writes. Alright, I need to speed up because my dog really wants to go on a walk and I've been sitting here for ages. I also read Ball Lightning by Cixin, translated by Joel Martenson. This is another one I listened to on audiobook and I really enjoyed it this way. I actually tried to read this book back when it first came out. I got the print copy from the library and it was not happening. So in cases like that, I usually turn to the audiobook and see if it works that way for me. This one definitely did. It's cool because it's about ball lightning, and Liu Cixin has an amazing imagination, just creativity fused with hard scientific ideas and, you know, really making use of the scientific method and everything. It's great. The ideas are great. The answers to things are so cool in this. It is dry as hell though. I mean, I think part of this is Martenson's translation. I much more enjoy Ken Liu's translation of Liu Cixin's work, but there's also something kind of flat and perfunctory and dry about Liu Cixin's style, I think. You know, trying to access it underneath the layer of translation here. I don't think he's particularly good at writing characters. The main character in this story, Chen, I never really got this guy. I never felt like he had emotions or was really feeling anything. There's a lot of telling you rather than showing you. I would actually describe Liu's approach to science fiction storytelling as didactic. He definitely seems to view the genre as a way to explain science and the scientific method and scientific thinking to the audience, and so he shoves a lot of that into characters' dialogue. So people have extremely unrealistic, long-winded speeches to explain something, and it really feels like some of the characters are lecturing rather than just having a conversation, and that in turn makes them feel more pompous and arrogant and egotistical, and like they just, you know, mansplainers basically, because it's a lot of men doing it in many cases. And that is annoying after a while. But the main concept here of ball lightning, where Liu basically imagines a real explanation for ball lightning to prove that it exists and what exactly it is, that was really cool. Just flat out cool. The rest of the story where, you know, this man Chen is trying to find out what ball lightning is because he saw his parents killed by it and everything, and then, you know, the militarization of scientific work, that was all right. I do think the book has a very good point to make about scientific work in the hands of the military, trying to turn your work into a weapon that is toxic, and the arrogance of some people to do that where they can only see what they're doing in terms of weapons and warfare is really scary. Like you want to see that separation between you know, military leaders and the scientific work and everything. But yeah, I feel like this book's problem is that it's very dry. However, I will continue reading things by Liu Cixin because I do think his ideas, his premises are cool. And the very last book is Recursion by Blake Crouch. This is one of the adult science fiction nominees in the BooktubeSFF Awards this year, which is why I picked it up. I've never read anything by Blake Crouch before. His like science fiction literary thrillers are not really my thing. This book was alright. I found the beginning of it to be very cliche, very stereotypical, and very off-putting because of that. You've got the alcoholic detective who's been divorced and his daughter is dead, and, you know, he drinks a lot, and the like tech genius dude and the scientist who's given the opportunity to do her work with, you know, an unlimited budget and everything. I was just like, I think I've seen this in a Hollywood film before. It becomes much more interesting when how shall I say this? Yeah, when the time travel is introduced. I don't think that's actually a major spoiler, but there's this whole thing about memories, fake memories, jumping into past memories, and the timeline shenanigans. Well, shenanigans is almost a lighthearted word. This has some terrifying, horrible consequences in this book. It took me a long time to get to the halfway point, even though it is a light, quick read. I just wasn't interested in it. And then after the halfway point, when I kind of saw what was going to happen, it got much more interesting, and I was actually invested in seeing what some of the characters were going to do to solve this problem. So overall, it was all right, and I think I might pick up Dark Matter at some point. That is the other big book by Crouch that everybody talks about, and I'm vaguely interested in seeing what the hype is around that particular book. But Recursion, it's fine. I think it's better if you imagine it as a Hollywood movie in your head. When I started doing that, it just worked a lot better for me. It feels like it's written like it wants to be adapted into a movie, basically. So that is it. Those are all the books I have read over the past couple of weeks. Do let me know if you have read any of these, or if you want to, leave me your comments down below. And I'll be back to talk to you very soon. For now, I have to go walk my dog and plant a tree. And after that, I may film another video, because I do need to talk about Dying of the Light and The Door into Summer. That will be later, but until then, bye.